China's pyramids may be astronomically aligned, and you'll see an aerial view of a valley full of pyramids, but this one here is in the Taklamakan Desert. Of course, it looks as if it's overgrown. Most of these are overgrown with vegetation. Much like Egypt's pharaohs, the emperors of China's Western Han dynasty had a thing for being buried inside pyramids, although less recognizable than the iconic ones we know from places like Giza, Egypt, scattered along the outskirts of Xi'an, along the banks of China's Wei River. The sides of these burial mounds align with cardinal points, at least some do. Others are twisted to face a different direction, and Italian researcher Giulio Magli thinks he knows why. Magli is what you might call an archaeoastronomer, a researcher who looks at the relationship between ancient architecture and celestial arrangements. He argues the explanation behind two distinct patterns of orientation among the tombs of the Western Han emperors might have to do with how some family traditions chose a different way to show how powerful they were. Emperor Wu of Han ruled from 141 to 87 BC and was placed in a burial mound nearly 250 meters long, according to Giulio Magli. To some rulers, the cardinal points of north, south, east, west were all important. Lining up your tomb with the globe's axis was a sign that you were still number one. But a number of the tombs have a slight rotation, off from by as much as nearly 14 degrees. Either a mistake was made or some ancient Chinese emperors aligned themselves with a different set of powers. If you're not familiar with the Western Han dynasty, you might still know of at least one of them, emperors, Queen Shi Huang. His reign unified warring states in 221 BC, possibly giving us the name China, Qin that is, so you don't really get more famous than having a massive country named after you. If that doesn't grab you, Qin is also famous for ordering the construction of an army of terracotta warriors to watch over his grave. And near this legion of buried statues stands an unexcavated 40-meter, that's 130-foot high, trapezoidal mound considered to be Qin's final resting place. The pre-modern world is full of pyramid-like structures, not because they were swapping notes or watching the ancient equivalent of grand designs, but because it's actually the simplest way to build big structures that won't fall down easily. And to make them meaningful and show how rulers were aligned with forces of nature, architects could either fit them into the aesthetics of the landscape or line them up with something even bigger still, the heavens. Many of Egypt's pyramids are aligned similarly, for example, with barely a slight deviation from the cardinal points. Exactly how they carried this out is still debated, with a recent study suggesting they use the stars as the equinoxes. Qin was no different. He also had his elongated pyramidal line up in a nearly perfect north-south direction. It's almost certain that his architects used the positioning of the sun and constellations to find the direction of the geometric South Pole. And while Qin had a great job bringing together the states, his peace did not last long. A few years later, the squabbling states were unified once again, this time under Liu Bang, who became known as Emperor Guizhou of Han. When Guizhou died, he also went for eternity under a pyramid, only this one pointed a few degrees off south, closer to the 167-degree mark. And just to mix it up, the next emperor did not even bother with a pyramid, going for a boring old mound instead, but Emperor number 4 went back to squared sides, again matching the cardinal points. Numbers 5 and 6 once again twisted their tombs, nearly lining up with Guizhou, but not quite. On this went, showing a pattern of dividing the dynasty into two distinct classes of pyramid, one with a single degree of north and the other off by between 8 and 14 degrees. So what gives? A wobbly compass, perhaps? Magley rules this out using paleomagnetic data and does not think it was a mistake of any other kind. He also rules out distinct forms of Chinese geomancy or feng shui based on a lack of supporting evidence. Instead, he thinks the deviation comes down to something called precession. The axis on which Earth rotates leans in one direction as it orbits the Sun, pointing towards two spots in the sky called the celestial poles. This lean wobbles slightly over time, slowly drawing a circle that takes about 25,700 years to complete. That means what is celestial north today, lining up with the star Polaris, was not the same around 2,000 years ago. But if we trace the path of Polaris back over history, its maximum western point would more or less line up with the odd orientation of each tomb around the time of its occupants passing, according to Magley. Polaris was an important star in Chinese tradition, seen as the great emperor of the heavens. So it's possible some members of the dynasty figured they'd skip the old north-south tradition and show they were aligned with this powerful star instead. It's a rather speculative idea, but Magley makes a strong case for the odd pattern of tombs, and his paper sure makes for a compelling new addition to what we know on ancient pyramid alignment. The research was published in Archaeological Research in Asia, and it's on Embedded Reality. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.